I want to welcome everyone here to another Built with Heart podcast. I think this is podcast number five or six. These podcasts are thick and fast. I'm losing track. We have an amazing guest with us today. I think one of the old school experts on the platform. I think he's you could almost call him one of the founding fathers of Codeable. Mr. Tom Morton, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Andy. Thank you so much for having me. And calling me one of the founders is just a way of saying the gray hair is really coming in thick. So thank you for that.
Absolutely not. And it's really great to have you on. And I will say that there will be probably half the people listening in this podcast just to hear your beautiful sounding voice.
It's all a filter.
Oh, good. Now, we're going to be talking about dealing with enterprise clients. So just before we get started, for anyone who does not know who you are, which would not be too many people at all, did you want to just give a quick intro to yourself and just talk about, how long you've been on Codeable?
So Tom Morton, leader of 6'3", which is my development company. I'd like to give you a little bit of history just to explain some of the context. It's very funny that you indicated how old school I am. So I went back kind of through my notes in preparation for this. I started developing in 2005, which may sound like a shock to some. What's more shocking, and it was even shocking for me, is Git was conceptualized in 2005. Ruby on Rails started in 2005. And WordPress 1.5 came out in 2005. So that'll just give you an understanding of the landscape that I started in. And then I started my company in 2008. And again, what an interesting time. Chrome was just released. GitHub was founded. And then WordPress 2.7 had just come out. So it was a very, very interesting time. 2.7, by the way, was the first time I believe we got pages, and it started to take shape as a little bit more than just a blog platform, a little bit more of a CMS. So I dug back through my archives, and I found that I first emailed Per, our lovely CEO of Codeable,
Yes,
on March 3rd of 2014, which seems like a lifetime ago. And I'm happy to report that after probably 3 or 4 emails back and forth with Per, I was able to join the platform that day. And so March 3rd is kind of my starting date, which means, if I'm doing my math right, that's 11 years on Codeable, which actually means I've earned every gray hair on my head. So thank you for calling that out.
absolutely. And I don't know if it's a scary thing for you or not, but the process of joining Codeable has changed a little bit since the whole back and forward with Per.
But it absolutely has.
Yes, but yeah, okay. So let's dive straight into what an enterprise client is, and sort of like what the difference is between an enterprise client and small business client.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of overlap between small business and enterprise, but there's a lot of differences too. And usually when we're talking about it in a freelance sense, it usually boils down to budget, but I disagree with that notion. Obviously, budget plays a factor, but you can almost think of an enterprise client versus a small business client as a speedboat versus the world's largest cruise ship, right? So we've got 4 passengers versus 7,000 passengers. What that means is the cruise ship can't really pivot fast. I mean, they have a destination, they got to get to their destination, and they can't really deviate too much. There's a ton of passengers, in our context, stakeholders, and usually there's structured schedules, a lot of resourcing concerns, safety protocols, which are all necessary and good things to have. But as a freelancer, these are things that if you're just starting out in the enterprise pool, you may not be super familiar with.
And obviously processes would be like a lot more formal. Even something like changing a font size could have to go through stages where some small business you could almost just change things on the fly and stuff. So did you find that a really good thing, that like everything is sort of strict and kind of formal, or do you sometimes prefer those smaller projects?
I mean, I prefer smooth projects. It doesn't matter what the level is. What I find best to smooth out the wrinkles of an enterprise client is you need a lot of homework up front. So what are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? I do find that with enterprise, there might be a lot more translation that you have to do. Small business may say something like, I need an e-commerce store. I need to sell 5 products and I need to ship them internationally. That's kind of a small to medium-sized business ask. Whereas enterprise may have an ask of, I have 5 e-commerce platforms, all shipping to various countries with various rules. And so you really have to do a little bit more translation of scope when you're talking to somebody from an enterprise perspective. I would say that's one of the larger hurdles that you'll encounter.
And so, would you be able to give someone some advice who's watching this podcast now, who's sort of only been dealing with kind of small business, like let's say really small businesses, and they want to step into the kind of the world of the enterprise client? What would you say the biggest challenges are for them to kind of transition into the more enterprise clients?
To me, you've got 3 hurdles, let's call them. You've got the beginning before you have an enterprise customer. You have dealing with an enterprise customer, and then you have kind of executing on a task and finishing it. So in the beginning, I'm never one to ask you to go buy a product until you need it, right? So don't buy a new mouse until your old mouse breaks. That's kind of my mentality. However, unfortunately, when we're starting to creep into that enterprise space, things like insurance and compliance certifications and all of that are really, really important. So while I'm not going to sit here and say, go out and get a multi-thousand-dollar certification because the juice may not be worth the squeeze, what I do think is important is to start to creep into that. So maybe look for a certification that's budget friendly, but it still accomplishes the same thing. Maybe look for an insurance plan that covers you for a reasonable amount of money, but also it's a reasonable, monthly premium. Again, what you don't want to do is you don't want to prepare, I'm going to have a $10 million project, and then that project never comes, but you're stuck with the overhead of paying for those types of things. So that's kind of what I would say the beginning part of enterprise looks like. Once you land an enterprise client and you're going through what I would call kind of contract negotiations, it's kind of the dating before marriage, if you will. Contracts are super, super important, not only for enterprise to show them you know exactly what you're doing, but it's also important for yourself. So scope creep is never more prevalent than in an enterprise situation.
Absolutely.
If we're all very familiar with scope creep.
Yes.
And the major concern is it's not necessarily something that they know they're doing, as much as there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people who have a lot of vested interest in what you may be doing, right? What I find is a rock solid technique is to appoint a single point of contact. So, Andy, let's say you're working for Acme Corp, and you are a middle manager who's brought me into this project. You've got 3 people you answer to. You've also got 3 team members below you, maybe designers and people like that. I would appoint you my single point of contact. And what that essentially means is I may email your designers, I may exchange emails or phone calls with your superiors, but you're the person who in writing will define kind of the answer to a question. Does that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense. I mean, I'm sure there's nothing worse than having 6 emails from 6 different people saying they want like a different font size, where you're saying I'll only listen essentially to that one person, and instead of you having to go back and forward and having to juggle, like it's just that one person.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. If Andy says make it blue, then it's got to be blue. Now, that doesn't mean you as the single point of contact don't go talk to your team and make a decision, but whatever is presented comes from you and it's approved. So to me, that is going to be kind of our silver bullet. It also combats, it also combats scope creep, right?
Yes.
So if a manager above you or a designer below you is making requests, that always has to get approved based on the single point of contact, right? So we have to make sure a designer asks for a carousel or maybe asks for a database change. But if that doesn't come approved through you, then it doesn't get done. And the other nice part about that is you can consider budget when you're dealing with a single point of contact. You as my single point of contact, you understand the hours we're putting in, you understand the budget. So if something goes outside of that scope, you'll have the full context to say, well, wait a minute, this is out of scope. It makes sense that there might be an additional task or an overage.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to ask, how much more important does that mean using tools like ClickUp or Asana? Like, are these tools like more essential with an enterprise client because of the size?
100%. And I found over the years, it's actually easier for me, and this may not be the case for everyone, to adopt rather than force, right?
Yes.
So I've used Trello.
You are the Trello man. You are the Trello
We're
man.
bringing Trello back, by the way.
Absolutely.
So I've used all these different platforms, and what I found is usually if you're dealing with a certain scope of client, they're going to have their own project management system. And what they will often do is they'll plug you into that. A really good case, an example I have is I just got added to an enterprise client's Asana boards. But there's about 5 different Asana boards with probably 100 tasks each. And I think tickets relevant to my scope are maybe 10. And so one quick tip, and I really like to use AI for this these days. And we'll talk about AI and compliance in a bit. But what I like to do is if I can gain API access to whatever software they're using, in this case, Asana, and generate my own key, I can then write a quick little Node.js script or a little automation inside of Google Sheets, and I'll pull the relevant data off of those tickets into a kind of a format that makes sense for me. Totally not necessary, obviously. If you're comfortable with Asana, you filter and you find what you're looking for. I just like to have a little bit of a layer of abstraction, especially if I'm handing things off to my team, right? So if you're a team of 5 and you're the single point of contact for that client, you want to make sure that it's, in our case, me and you, versus your 5 developers talking to their 5 people. So that layer of abstraction in the tooling helps too.
No, absolutely. Like, so you've sort of explained that person who wants to move into the kind of going from small clients into the kind of enterprise client. Now, let's say they're all signed up and ready to go. What's the best way for them to? They've been in the workrooms or on LinkedIn or however to find the contract. So, what's the best way for them to sort of get set up and the enterprise client is all set and ready to go?
What I found is you lead with your best foot forward, right? And what often happens is they will provide a scope and there will be a long negotiation period. And half of that is them assembling their requirements, and half of that is you translating their requirements. We can go back to the e-commerce analogy. If they have 5 different web stores all coming out of a single source, you're going to have to understand that logic of, well, products A through C go here, and they're distributed in a certain logistical way that you don't understand as the developer. The big thing that I would say is there is going to be a lot of information that you don't know. It's almost, I don't want to compare it to the Wizard of Oz, but your single point of contact is kind of the wizard behind the curtain pulling all those levers, but you really don't know what's going on behind the curtain. There's going to be deadlines, priorities, shifting priorities, management changes, all that fun stuff happening behind the single point of contact. And you want to kind of prepare for that. The 2 biggest things I would say is your scope of work needs to be rock solid. So, take your time as far as the scoping process is concerned. And then I personally like to anticipate scope creep. It's going to happen, right? If it doesn't happen, amazing. But if it does, I provision in my contracts to say, and maybe not in this language, obviously, but if scope creep happens, this is what it means. It's billed at this certain hourly rate, or it's identified, the project is paused, and we scope and cost what that looks like. However you want to do it, the method or the mechanism doesn't matter. What matters is it's in there. And as a person who can project being on the other side of that, if I'm the single point of contact in an enterprise solution or an enterprise company, I want to see that. I want to see, well, what happens if we ask for something outside of the box? If you're already coming with a solution, that's going to bump you to the top of the list.
Yeah. Okay. So like essentially, you would say that. Look, I think in every project, and I know on Codeable they sort of really push to kind of add that extra little percentage on top to in case the worst case scenario. But in this enterprise, you'd say to add that little bit extra because of all the hoops you might have to jump through.
Well, and I'm not even saying add budget as much as just make sure that you're calling out something in your contract that states, hey, this is how we're going to handle this situation. But it's a really good point. Codeable is such a great platform to take on enterprise clients because
Absolutely.
of the way the platform works.
Yes.
And what I would also recommend is maybe the client wants to scope the entire task, a 6-month task, let's say, up front. That's all well and good. But breaking that down into bite-sized, actionable, deliverable pieces is absolutely essential. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to say, yep, it's going to be X number of dollars and it'll take us 6 months. I'll talk to you in 3 months when we have an update. That's not going to work with enterprise. If you have a 6-month task, what you want to do is break that up into probably 10 subtasks or 5 subtasks, all with their own scope, budget, deliverables, schedule. And that way it's very, very easy to, and I like to use this term, proof of work. It's very easy to show, hey, this is what we said we were going to do. This is what we've done. It's easy to deliver. Even if the whole project isn't done and really the client can't action anything, it really matters to be able to show them we're making very consistent deliverables. We're staying on budget, staying on timeline.
Absolutely. Like I certainly have to agree that it is a great platform to work with enterprise clients. Because of the workroom and being able to phase projects and even set like monthly schedules and stuff like that. So without sort of throwing any enterprise clients under the bus, so to speak, can you share any stories with enterprise clients that went really well, and maybe just sneak in one that did not go so well, and you don't have to say any names at all?
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately I'm contracted up, so I can't say any names, but thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to talk about the ones that went well, and I do have an example of one that went a little awry. Let's call it that. I have 2 really, really happy customers that I've had, I believe, since around 2013, 2014. One is a national furniture chain for the US and Canada. They're retail and they're also online. And they originally came to me with an execution problem. And this is something that you will see often in enterprise solutions or enterprise companies. Enterprise companies are busy, and especially their IT departments. They are overwhelmed because not only do they have to deal with all of their online infrastructure, but often they may have to deal with an in-person infrastructure like a store. They also have to deal with employees and security, and they have a laundry list of things to do. So their marketing department came to me and said, we need kind of just a one-off microsite under the brand that would allow marketing to quickly and easily make changes to it. And immediately I thought WordPress, and immediately I thought, we can absolutely do this. So that was challenge number 1, kind of being an offshoot of the normal IT stack. The second challenge was obviously training them. So they were used to a proprietary CMS. They really didn't know about WordPress too much, and they had a few they had a few preconceived notions. So had to knock those down immediately. What was nice is the way we work is usually customers bring the design. We have design resources, but we really like for customers, especially with an established brand, to bring their own design. So rather than asking them to do anything, we mirrored their design one-to-one, custom WordPress theme. We developed a few custom WordPress plugins that allowed the editing process to be a little bit easier. And then we developed a kind of a training system within the site, around 10 videos, that was just, hey, how do I, right? So, hey, how do I update a blog post? How do I update a page? How do I build a new lead form? Things like that. And I'm happy to say that has been super successful for many, many years. They're still a customer, and they were really happy with that. And I'll mention,
Yep.
I'll mention one more if you'll allow.
Of course.
So I also landed around 2013, 2014, 2 very good years.
Absolutely.
A large pharmaceutical company. And so when you think of pharmaceuticals, you really don't think web development, but they actually have legal requirements to publish a lot of things online to make sure it's open to their customers. If you start watching pharmaceutical commercials, especially in the US, you'll notice they all have domain names, and there's a lot of very specific information that has to go on those sites. And there's also a lot of legal compliance to the design, which I found very interesting. At the time, I didn't know it. This customer came to me. It was around a 50-page marketing website that their previous developer had essentially just abandoned them on. Nothing had started. They had a design, and they said, not necessarily that the budget was unlimited, but big budget, we have to get this done. The timeline is of the utmost importance. So at the time, it was only myself and another person. It was a very difficult job, a lot of sleepless nights, but we got it done. And that's the other thing that I'll tell you about enterprise. They will often recognize when you're going above and beyond, and you're making a lot of friends, because at the end of the day, if you think about it, you're not really partnering with a company, you're partnering with your single point of contact. And if you knock something out of the park, that single point of contact is going to look like a hero within the organization. And of course, because you're the one who helped help them be a hero, they're going to want to hire you again. And that's the whole thing. You want to make sure you're developing a relationship. I'm never going to be a proponent of working long hours or overworking yourself, but I will say that there will be a point where you may have to make some of those sacrifices in the short term to have long-term gains. And I'm happy to say that that company is still with me. We're working on a project with them right now. So it really matters when you show up and you hit it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, to have clients of that long, then you obviously are building great relationships. And you actually did make a good point there about kind of some strict kind of things with enterprise clients. I'm sure you have to deal with a lot of non-disclosure agreements and stuff like that, a lot more than with a small client.
Absolutely, yeah. You definitely have to be very wary of your contractual obligations. AI has made that so much better. You know, you can feed contracts into something like ChatGPT and really get some bullet points out of it because there's a lot of legalese. Of course, disclaimer: I am not a lawyer. Please, please have kind of your local laws and customs checked before you do any of that. Obviously, one point I'll make as I'm talking about a client that didn't go so well is the role of AI and how things have changed. I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had a customer. I wouldn't call them enterprise as much as mature startup, which has its own enterprise-like qualities to it. Very large business doing around $10 million in revenue year over year. And I call out that number to kind of understand where they are in the stack, if you will. And they had an e-commerce solution where they were selling digital products. What I didn't know at the time, and if you remember earlier, I mentioned taking your time and scoping. This is where I learned that lesson.
Absolutely.
Was they had a WooCommerce installation that was also heavily customized by around 5 to 6 developers over 5 or 6 years. So that was mistake number one, not catching that and not understanding that really this entire ecosystem was actually just a bunch of different parts that were loosely talking to each other. The second was my single point of contact was someone who was very hands-on, even in a little bit of coding. And so while that may sound great, maybe they're trying to jump in and help, what ended up happening was there were a lot of conflicts. I was working, they were working. They didn't use version control. Obviously, I'm using Git. And so there were then a lot of overheads and a lot of hoops that we had to jump through because of that. What I would say is if I had scoped it properly in the beginning, and I had kind of drawn clear borders around the idea that, hey, if we're working on something, we can't have kind of just random changes to our code while we're in the middle of something because it does cause additional overhead, with the caveat that if that is something necessary, it would just incur overages for us to deal with it. That would have saved the project. And I'm happy to say that we did a great job for them and they left very happy, but it was definitely a trial. So I would put that in the lessons learned category. And the one thing that I will say regarding AI in them is had I had access to an AI tool back then, to be able to look at that code base and to give a general report of pitfalls and things to look at, that would be invaluable. However, when you're dealing with enterprise clients, you do need to think about intellectual property and all of those types of things. So when you're entering something into ChatGPT, make sure that there isn't a contractual conflict there. Make sure you're not giving an LLM or another service any sort of proprietary information, because that could put you in serious hot water.
Absolutely. So yeah, you've sort of been through the process of the kind of from starting to like you're now working with the client. If you could give like 3 practical tips, and you must have some great tips to have some clients for this amount of years. What would be your kind of 3 top practical tips to succeed with enterprise clients?
It's hard to boil it down to 3, but I would say the first has to be communication over and above anything else. I tell my team this and I tell other people this. Unfortunately, my job, even though I'm very proficient in programming, my job's probably 25 to 30% programming, and the rest is communication. Whether it's contract negotiation, scoping, or just communication within the project itself, communication is the biggest part of my job. And it's just because over communication is really just standard communication when it comes to enterprise. And even if they don't have good communication practices, if you're keeping them informed, they're happy about it. Everyone likes to be informed, even if it's bad news. There's a delay or there's a conflict or there's a blocker on their side. Communicate early and often is going to be kind of your Swiss Army knife to solve a lot of your issues. I guess something that we haven't talked about that I would say is a little bit of a tip is just expect a long timeline. If I can give you a 10-second tangent, the furniture company I mentioned earlier, we sent them a scope for a one-off project, I want to say early 2023. And I did my normal follow-up. I think for about 6 months, we traded emails back and forth. But the proposal kind of just went cold, and I let it go cold. Probably bad practice on my part. But we moved on. We were still doing other work for them. I didn't worry about it. And July of this year, out of nowhere, I get a reply to that email. When can we get started? So you just never know when these types of things are going to come through. So I would say expect long cycles, have patience, and make sure you're expecting the fact that there's going to be a long timeline. And then it kind of goes with communication, but documentation is also going to be, again, another superpower, especially if you get into trouble. So when I talk about communication, it's broadcasting or informing the client, but documentation is a little bit different in the sense that you want to make sure that when decisions are made, you document when, where, and who, so that you have a bit of an audit trail on decision making and why something was done and why it was done this way. Especially, let's say your single point of contact gets another job somewhere else, and suddenly you're left with a new person who has no idea who you are, has no idea the status of the project. That's a really quick and easy way to get them up to speed. Another thing would be, let's say a higher up is upset with the task. Maybe that's your fault, maybe it's not. If you have documentation on exactly why things were done the way they were done, how they adhere to the contract, that's going to be an instant way to de-escalate that situation. So it really does help in both of those scenarios. Just try to document everything.
Yeah, those 3 tips are excellent. All right, so you know what? I'm completely sold. As soon as this podcast is over, I'm going to go out there and find myself a huge enterprise client. Now, where would you say is the best place? Because I'm sure these clients aren't just like in the newspaper screaming out for a WordPress developer.
You would be surprised. So I'm less inclined to do this these days, but I actually found a lot of leads on social media just a couple of years ago. So LinkedIn, Twitter. What ends up happening is middle management, again, those hopefully potential single point of contact that you may hook up with, they're out there and they're looking for people, right? So they're looking for X developer or Y solution. And so if you can jump in there and allow them to find a solution through you, that's instant benefit for you and obviously benefit for them. I was just talking to an individual who is an enterprise client, and they're looking for 2 React developers. So we have React developers on our team. And while they were looking for more of a hire situation, I pitched the idea of, hey, we have 2 people on our team. I would be more than happy to contract with you. They work, and then we manage it. And surprisingly, they went for it. I really didn't think they were going to. So you never know. I would also say Codeable is an unbelievable source for that. You really have to do a little bit of fact finding in those pre-workroom areas. But the enterprise customers are there. I found many enterprise customers there. And also stretch your understanding of enterprise. When we're talking about enterprise, we shouldn't talk about Amazon or Apple or Microsoft. There are plenty of Fortune 500 companies who you've never heard of, but they need a lot of help. Specifically, I know of one in the Midwest that I had never heard of, but they're a data analytics company for farms, which is a huge market, and they need help. And so you can definitely offer them something. But that would be my two biggest call outs. Social media, Codeable is an unbelievable source for that. And also your local community as well, getting involved where more traditional businesses are, your Chamber of Commerce, your Rotary clubs and things like that. As much as we're online chronically these days, I would say doing a bit of a, in real life meetup also helps. And you'd be surprised, even at WordCamps, there's a lot of enterprise people there sniffing around. So definitely check those out.
Yeah, there's still the old school method of all of the kind of the WordPress events and even other events. You could always
Absolutely.
it's still all about the handshaking, and I don't know if people still hand out business cards, but yeah,
I've got some.
Great. Well, look, honestly, it was really great to have you on. You have some really great insights. I don't think there are too many better people on Codeable to talk about enterprise clients. So just for everyone who wants a kind of quick recap on everything we spoke about, if you had to give a 1 minute kind of overview on enterprise clients, how to find them and kind of how to be successful, what would you say?
I would say go where big business is, whether that be online or in person or Codeable, because they're there. Expect them to be a little bit like a cruise ship, logistically a bit of a nightmare, but as long as you can focus on what you're trying to do and you can have that single point of contact, you're going to win. Show up early, show up often, make sure that you're able to kind of put that extra work in when necessary, obviously within scope. And then just communicate and document. Those are going to be my biggest tips.
All right, great. Well, look, it was great to have you on again. I will share a link in the description of the video to people to check out your profile. There's probably many people in the enterprise space watching this right now saying, "Oh my God, I have to sign this guy. I have to sign a contract with this guy." Just hearing,
I will not complain.
Just hearing your beautiful voice will be enough for them to sign up. All right, and also a quick shout out if you that it is a great platform on Codeable. If you are watching this and you are kind of looking for a WordPress developer, that is the place to go. And I will also say, like a little YouTube spiel, that please like and subscribe if you did really enjoy this podcast. So yeah, thanks again for doing this. And I will look forward to seeing everyone on the next one.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you all so much. And Andy, thank you so much.